Good morning and welcome to the annual policy breakfast for the First Five Marin Children and Families Commission. We have something like 300 registered, so we will begin with whom we have, and we will end with whom we then have. I'm Sister Joan Hannah. I'm a Dominican sister, and I am director of St. Raphael Preschool in downtown San Rafael. I'm also privileged to be the chair of the First Five Commission, Marin, this term. So I get to be here to welcome you. Thank you. A number of commissioners are here this morning, and our schedule is tight. So I'm just going to ask the commissioners, wherever they are, I see various ones, to simply stand wherever you are. I see standing. And I would like to invite us all to thank the commissioners for their passionate and dedicated service to the children and families of Marin. This morning's gathering, or at least those who said they would be with us, and I hope will arrive, is the largest group that we have had attending any of our policy breakfasts. And we had something like 300 register. So I hope that more of these chairs will be filled, because I think this is going to be a program that is going to be compelling for us to hear, mull over, and take maybe some action on. The topic of race, ethnicity, and inequality and the impacts on the children of Marin County struck a chord of interest with each of you and urged you to be here today to hear how and where this discussion might inform and lead you. All the excellent work of the Marin Commission, and I see many of you with the annual report, could not take place without the superb leadership of a small but very vigorous staff of First Five Marin. Amy Reisch, whom you'll hear from in a few minutes, is the executive director. Michelle Fideli is at her daughter's graduation from college today. And Marjorie Delgadillo is our assistant program manager. So thank you to all of that fine staff. And I invite you to welcome Amy Reisch, the executive director, mover, shaker, and inspiration of Marin First Five, who will preview the morning's program. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Well, mover, shaker. I was asked to give you a little bit of background as to why this topic and why this year. So first, a little tiny bit of history. Very soon after the commission was formed, the commissioners developed their vision for children in Marin. And that vision was a vision of equity. They didn't call it that. We didn't use that word as frequently 14 or 15 years ago, but that's what it was. And as they thought about how they were going to implement that vision, how they were going to work to move towards that vision, they realized that there were several big contextual issues that they had to keep in mind as they planned their work. One, in order to achieve a vision of equity for all children in Marin, systemic and structural inequalities had to be removed. Two, financial resources alone, and certainly First Five's resources alone, were not going to make that happen. And three, for First Five in particular, investing only in direct services which ameliorate the impacts of inequality was not sufficient. So these were not new ideas. but they informed the development of the Commission's operating principles and theory of change. And those have guided our work all through the years. Equity has become a hot topic in the last couple of years. Organizations, communities, institutions are talking more and more about equity, principles of equity, equity frames, equity lenses. This is a really big issue for many people. And some of that popularity, or that, really it's not popularity, but that concern and emphasis is because of many, many reports, mountains of data, and more recently, stark visual images of the impact on various communities of systemic inequity. And when we look at the disparities in health, education, housing, employment, political power, law enforcement, etc., we can't help but notice, when we look at that data, that race, color, ethnicity matter. And when race, color, and ethnicity matter across every aspect of people's lives, and they do, we have to talk about systemic racism. So, it's a funny thing to be clapping for, isn't it? So because there are many groups and organizations in Marin trying to grapple with how we resolve inequity, how we work to reduce inequity, especially for children, and because we heard from so many people in our community, at our communications forums and in other venues, that we cannot talk about equity without talking about race. And because of the national political discourse, if we can call it that, we thought that it might be a really good time to begin or join a frank conversation about race, equity, and inequity. And so here we are. Before I turn this entire meeting over to our illustrious moderator, I would like to ask the members of the planning committee, the folks who lent their time, their passion, their wisdom, their honesty to help make this possible. I would like to ask those folks please to stand. Liz, you're supposed to be at this table. The format and content of this discussion is very much because of their input and was very, very much appreciated. So now, the moderator for this discussion is somebody most of you probably know, Johnathan Logan. John. I'll just say John, it's easier. John, for 11 years, was the executive director of the Marin Community Services District, and under his leadership developed the Health and Wellness Center, built Rocky Graham Park, which I hope everybody has seen or will see. It's incredible. Led the capital campaign for the redevelopment of the community center, basically led the revitalization of Marin City, and that was very exciting. Now he is the special assistant to the president of the Marin Community Foundation, with a special emphasis on deepening community engagement in the foundation's work. And we're really excited about that. The details of his bio are on the back of your program. So without further ado, welcome, John.
Thank you. I'll use the light. So I want to first thank Amy for that very biased introduction that my mother would be extremely proud of. So thank you for that, and thank you First Five Commission for having a vision and leadership to orchestrate this event where we have so many faces and people concerned about equity here in our county. I want to first welcome you all again to this conversation, and it really will be a conversation around the race, ethnicity, and how those two things, very powerful forces in our society, are used to create, in a lot of cases, inequities, and in other cases, perpetuate inequities. And so I want to invite you all into the conversation. It may feel a little uncomfortable at times, and if you see your neighbor squirming a little too much, just pat him on the knee and say everything's going to be all right. Just by a show of hands real quick, anyone here not prepared to talk about race? All right, the doors are officially locked, so you're going to be involved regardless if you want to or not at this point. So just by the way of framing what we plan to do today, just want to make a couple introductory remarks, and then I'm going to introduce Julie to come give a brief talk. But by way of framing, a lot of us, when we think about racism and the impact of racism, we think about it from the individual standpoint. Particularly, we see, pretty stark visuals from the past of crosses burning in yards and dogs being sicked on individuals. And you sort of have that context for what racism looks like. But racism has evolved over time, and the impacts of racism can be seen in more structural ways. And that's really what we're going to focus this discussion on today, is the institutions that exist, not just government, not just school districts, but nonprofits and businesses and, through lending practices. Those things have race deeply embedded in the way practices happen because of policies that may have started a long time ago. And so what we want to talk about is how we start to understand those issues, and then how do we, as a community, have conversation around it and strategize around how we undo those inequities that exist here in the county. So I just want to put that out there. We're going to talk a little bit about individual and how that manifests, but we also want to really get to the systematic components of racism that exists in our society. So put your seatbelts on or take them off, however you like to ride, and we're going to have a great discussion. So with that, I would like to introduce our first presenter, Julie Nelson, and she is the director of the Government Alliance for Race and Equity. Prior to that, she worked in Seattle, and she led the Race and Social Justice Initiative there in the community. She's going to tell you a bit more about what all that means, but if you don't mind, please give Julie a warm Marin County welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning. Good morning. This feels like such a cozy way to have a conversation.
You want to like cross your leg and yeah.
Oh, thank you. This name tag has been all over the place. I think it's fallen off 10 times already. So thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. This is my first time here, and really, you have a lovely home. I wish I could spend more time here. And thank you for the warm introduction. I want to actually start by just saying a little bit more about my background, because sometimes when I get introduced, or I'm introducing myself, and I'll say I'm Julie Nelson with the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, that the government, sometimes it's like what people think of from a governmental perspective doesn't convey warm, fuzzy feelings, does it? And so I want to talk a little bit about how it is that I came to work in government and on racial equity. And first, the racial equity piece of it. I was someone who, coming up as a child, received messages about race, had a white middle-class upbringing. All the messages that I got about race were around equality, that if you just treat people nice and if we treat people equal, then that's what we do as good Americans. And it was very much about race, it was about gender, it was about not actually acknowledging where and how inequities have been created. And so for me, as a young person, I had very much of a sense of activism, that I could see that there were inequities all over the place and that I wanted to make a difference. And so I was politically active on a wide range of different things. As a freshman in college, something happened to me, however, that kind of set me on a different path. I was sexually assaulted my first week in college, and it led to me going through, got some services, went to the crisis clinic, and dealt with it in the ways that people deal with being sexually assaulted. And then a few years later, I decided that I wanted to give back, that I wanted to really become active in preventing violence against women. So I went to volunteer for an organization. To become a volunteer on the crisis clinic, on the crisis line, you had to go through 80 hours of training, which is a significant chunk of time for a volunteer position. Of those 80 hours, 2 days were on race. And the demographic of people in the room were very much my same demographic. There was a lot of young white women in the room who were very passionate about preventing violence against women. When it came to talking about race, I have to say that there was just about every dysfunctional behavior that could play out, did play out. There were tears, there was denial, there was blame, there was shame. Everything that actually was not helpful for thinking about racial equity and preventing violence against women played out. And it was at that moment in my life that I said to myself, I have a really broad idea of what liberation is going to look like. And if we have this elephant in the room in one area, there's no way that we're ever going to make progress on any area. And so that was 30 years ago. And over the past 30 years, I have focused on racial equity, still recognizing that, of course, we have work to do when it comes to sexism and heterosexism. And there's lots of issues that we need to work on. But racial equity has really been the way that I have centered my work. Other thing about me working for government, when I was, and it's so great, I was chatting with the young people who are going to be up here in just a little bit. When I was that age, I did not imagine myself working for government. That I really did think of myself as an activist, and I had seen change take place by community organizing, advocating with government as the target. Not that change would take place within government. But lo and behold, out of grad school, I got an internship with the city of Seattle. And time is just surreal sometimes, like, I don't know what happened, but 23 years later, I had been working for government for 23 years. And so I want to ask the question, people in the room, would you raise your hand if you currently work for government? Oh, nice. Keep them up. Raise your hand if you've ever worked for government. And raise your hand if you use government. So sometimes I have the pleasure of interacting with someone who self-identifies as an anarchist and is very anti-government. And it's like, you know, even if that's your political ideology, you are still using government. So I think from a perspective of us thinking about what government is and does, there's a lot of work that we need to do, thinking about what the public sector is and what the public good is. We have a lot of contradictions in this country where we can think about the history of the United States, and we've got some ideas that have permeated us historically that have actually changed over the course of time. So thinking about the foundation of the country, when we had the statement, all men are created equal. Anyone remember who wrote that? Thomas Jefferson. And so when Thomas Jefferson wrote, all men are created equal, who was he including in that? White men, right. White men who owned property. And so that idea of, we could say that we've had equality as a core value from the country's foundation, and we have in some ways, but what we're talking about has shifted dramatically over the course of centuries. And so I think it's important to hold how that has shifted, for us to really think about it, and for us to be able to have a vision about what it is that we are trying to create. We also have got to be real. We have got to be honest that racial inequities are not random. They are not natural. They were intentionally created over the course of centuries. They were created by government along with other partners, but it was governmental policy that, that was passed, that things like who could be a citizen, who could vote, who could own property, who was property, whose land was whose land, all of those things were intentional laws, policies, and practices that took place that intentionally created racial inequities. And so right now we should not be surprised that we have racial inequities because they were intentionally created. The question for us is what we are going to do about it. That if in fact we intentionally, our ancestors intentionally created racial inequities, the responsibility for us is to actually imagine the society that we want to live in and to change what we are doing. And that, of course, started to change in the middle of the last century, thinking about the civil rights movement in a big way. Civil rights movement, people marching in the street, demanding change. Did government wake up one morning and say, my bad? No, it was because of people organizing in the street, demanding that government change. And we have seen amazing political things happen, things like the Civil Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, Voting Rights Act. Lots of progressive things have happened that have led to some levels of change. The unfortunate reality, however, is that we see many of the same racial inequities that we had before the civil rights movement, we still have today. And in fact, some of them have actually gotten worse. You look at wealth, the accumulation of wealth, that has gotten worse. We look at some of the educational disproportionalities, that has gotten worse. And so for us to think about sort of what it is we're doing within our communities, within our institutions that are actually going to, what we need to do to lead to change. The work that I'm doing right now with the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, we have identified what we sort of, I hate this terminology, best practices or good practices, what we see that actually makes a difference. And there's 3 big buckets. I know that's sort of bureaucratic, but we've got 3 big buckets of ideas that we talk about. And one of them is that we have to be able to normalize conversations about race. John was making jokes about it, that sometimes it can be a tense conversation. And what we have found is that part of that tension is that we're walking around with different ideas of what the topic even is. And so if we're using different terminology, we have different understanding, of course there's going to be tension in the room. So we have to be able to come up with some shared terminology and some shared understanding about what it is that we're even talking about. Some of the key ideas that we really grapple with, defining what what racial equity is and what racial inequity is. We oftentimes start with the topic of racial inequity. And Amy mentioned the fact that we've got report after report that come out that look at racial inequities. We can identify where there's disproportionalities and we can share that data. The challenge with data, however, sometimes is that those reports very, very frequently come out and they sit on a shelf. And so we are not wanting to just document what racial inequities are. We need to be able to actually develop strategies to change those inequities. I want to also say that this idea of racial inequities, it's where a lot of people start, because it's like those gaps, the disproportionalities, they're big and they cut across every single indicator for success. Whether you were talking about education, housing, jobs, health, criminal justice, every single indicator for success, race matters. And so we know that there's gaps, but we also know that we not only want to identify what's wrong, but it's important for us to be able to visualize what it is that we're trying to create. So what is racial equity? The definition that we use is that we want to close those gaps, but we want to lift up success for everyone. It's not a matter of creating systems and institutions that actually you sink to the bottom, where you make things equally bad for everyone. We want to improve outcomes across the board. The Ferguson Commission report that came out, is about about Ferguson and criminal justice. But one of the pieces of data in it that actually struck me the most was around differences in life expectancy. That the difference in life expectancy in Ferguson, 30 years. 30 years. Now that is not because of a single police officer shooting and killing a single person. Criminal justice is a part of it, but across every single system, we are failing our communities. And so we have to be able to come together. Thank you. And think about transforming our institutions, our structures, and our communities. A couple of other big themes that we believe are really important for us to understand: the difference between implicit and explicit bias. Familiarity, raise your hand if you're familiar with the concept of implicit bias. Good. A lot of times implicit bias gets framed as an individual thing, whether I have implicit bias or, how much implicit bias I have. Implicit bias, it just means that used to be old school racism would see signs in the windows, would see those cross burnings. It was in your face. It was conscious. What we see right now with implicit bias is that it sometimes, oftentimes, isn't even named. Race is not named, but there are differences in impacts. And so that's where we really try and focus, is on the impacts. And so analyzing what it is that's perpetuating those disproportionalities at the unconscious level. Amy also mentioned institutional and structural racism. We're not just talking about individual acts of bigotry. We're talking about institutions that work better for white people. Policies, practices, and procedures that work better for white people, oftentimes without even naming it. It's not like you can pick up a policy and it says, this is designed for white people, does not name race. But again, what we have to focus on is that end outcome. So we have to analyze what it is that we're doing that's creating these inequities. And structural racism just means that across every single institution, we have institutionalized racism. And a lot of times we like to point fingers, oh, it's about the police department, or oh, it's about the educational system. Those are both true. And we also know that it's about every single institution. So for us to get to different outcomes in the community, we have to come together across our institutions, recognize that historical legacy that we're living with, and the fact that racism plays out across our society. And it's at the structural level that racial inequities are created and are maintained. So from a content, when I said we talk about normalizing conversations about racial equity, that's what we mean. Those understanding of that key terminology then allows you to have a conversation about what needs to change. Lots of places that the Government Alliance on Race and Equity is working will come in and they'll say things like, well, we've got equity as a core value. It's a principle, which is good. It's a place to start. But when you ask the question, what does that mean? If there's, confusion around, well, it means we have it as a principle. Having it as a principle is not enough. That for us actually to have impact, we have to be able to operationalize equity. That means in routine decision-making processes, we have to be able to analyze who is benefiting from and who is burdened by any given decision. That we have to actively insert equity, racial equity, into our decision-making processes. I mentioned data. It's not enough just to have data that is in a report that lives on a shelf. That we have to use data to identify not only where we are, but where we want to go. And have strategies that actually move us along that path. And we use data to actually measure whether we're making a difference. Third big bucket is around organizing. And I know historically we have thought about organizing from the perspective of community organizing, and community organizing still needs to take place, and I say that from a perspective of keeping government and other institutions accountable. Community has to put that pressure on our institutions. But the reality is that we're at this interesting moment in time right now. When I ask the question, the number of you who work for government, there is a big chunk of people who raise their hands. We are positioned within institutions, and we have the power and leverage to create change from within our institutions. If we want government that is of the people, by the people, and for the people, that is our responsibility. We have got to be able to create the institutions that are going to get us the outcomes that are in alignment with what our values are. So organizing is building infrastructure within institutions. So when decisions are being made, we're talking about race. There's not tension about it. It's just that's the way we do business. So those three ideas, normalizing, operationalizing, organizing, when those three things are happening, that's where we see their traction is developing, that we start to move the needle on the outcomes that we're getting. I want to come back and say the other thing that we sometimes talk about when it comes to normalizing is around creating urgency. That it's almost the opposite, that there has been so many years of centuries where racial inequity has been the norm, that now when those reports come out and we see, disproportionality in criminal justice or education, whatever the topic, we see those reports, it almost feels like we've got this collective shrug of our shoulders, like it's natural. And as I said in the beginning, racial inequities are not natural. And so for us to actually change those outcomes, we have to approach this conversation with urgency. We have to make it a priority. I was on a panel, not as comfy of chairs, but a panel a few years back where I was sitting talking with the police chief of Seattle. Different police chief than is there now, but having a conversation about racial equity. And in the audience, there was a big group of police officers. And the police chief at the time was talking about how hard change was. He kept repeating over and over how hard change is, and that change takes a lot of time. And while I understand that sometimes change is hard, and sometimes change does take time, I also believe that we create our own reality. And the message that he was sending to those officers at that moment was that change is not a priority. Just keep doing same old, and if they keep doing same old, and if we keep doing same old, we will keep getting the same outcomes. So for us to get to different outcomes, we have to be able to say, no, this is not okay. We have to approach this conversation from a perspective of urgency, and it has got to be a priority. Because what we have seen is that when we feel urgency about a topic and we make it a priority, change can take place quickly. It can take place overnight. I don't know about you, but just thinking about something like marriage equality. A couple of years ago, I would not have anticipated the way that that happened so quickly. How did it happen? It happened because we normalized a conversation, we organized, and we operationalized. We put it into action. These are not just theories. We are putting theory into action. And so when that became a priority, we saw change happen overnight. Well, maybe not literally overnight, but it sure was quick. And so we need to be able to do the same thing when it comes to race, when it comes to racial inequities. Have to be able to make it a priority. And I want to, on the topic, jumping back to what the police chief said around change being hard, I want to say that sometimes change, it's not that so much that change is hard, but that the way in which we think about change, how each of us is positioned, that we have power and influence. Each one of us has power and influence to create change within our own little spheres of control. And so for us to create change within our own jobs, within our own lives, that's a responsibility. And oftentimes those individual changes, the changes within individual organizations, it might feel like, man, we're trying a lot of things and we're doing a lot of things. And it feels like, you know, they should be good things, but we're not seeing as much of an impact as we'd like to see. And I want to share an example of sort of the necessity of perseverance when it comes to change. In Seattle, work across all indicators for success, but within the juvenile justice world, there had been lots of years of people making individual changes, policy changes, practice changes that were all good changes, but we sometimes refer to them as transactional changes. So within within programs or passing an individual policy, we create those transactional changes. And so, and they're good. I never mean to sound dismissive of those types of changes, but given that we're really trying to shift towards transformational change, we've got to keep that in mind, what it is that we're actually trying to do. So an example of a transactional change, for years, some data was available around disproportionality in court appearances. And so if you're a young person involved in the criminal justice system, you have a court date, you're supposed to show up for your court date. If you don't show up, it turns out that you get in even worse trouble. And so within the system, human services, the courts, and the police department, they knew that this was an issue. And so they had come up with some strategies to try and change that, get more kids to show up for their court appearances. And so I actually love the first thing that they tried to do. They sent reminder letters in the mail. By your laughter, I'm guessing that you, so what do you think? Did it have any impact? Okay, this is one of the things I love about this story because it actually did have impact. That they started sending reminder letters in the mail. 6 months later, came back to look at the data. And in fact, overall results had increased, that there were more kids showing up for their court appearances. However, they had a dual goal of increasing court appearances overall and closing the racial disproportionality. So they looked not only at the overall data, but also the data by race. Turns out that they had increased racial disproportionality. And so their goal, twofold goal, so kudos to them. Normally, government would have patted themselves on the back and said, we were successful. No, their goal was to address racial disproportionality. So they actually did then what they should have done in the beginning. They had some conversations with some youth and said, you know, what are the strategies for us to get you to show up for your court appearances? Not a single one of the young people said, send us a letter in the mail. But what they did say, two things. Transportation was an issue, and that they did want a reminder, but they didn't want a letter in the mail. They wanted a text or a phone call, not from the government. And so in response to that, the partnership developed working with the community-based organizations, a couple of them, in fact, where they did start making the phone calls to young people. Again, track the data 6 months later, and the gap had closed. Not totally disappeared, but the gap had closed. So I share that as an example of, a great example actually, of people within a system focused on racial equity making a real change. Did that move the needle overall on racial disproportionality? Maybe a tiny, tiny blip, but not the sort of change that we're looking for. So after, a whole series of transactional changes over the course of a decade, literally a decade, one of the things that is on the table right now is a new juvenile justice system, or juvenile justice center. And sometimes language we use, it makes me uncomfortable even saying it, because the words juvenile justice center, do you know what that is? Yeah, it's a jail. So it's like the jail that currently exists for young people. It needs to be, it's horrible. It's, really, really problematic. So this conversation around, how do we redevelop the jail? And so there's all this conversation around like the number of beds. Can we reduce the number of beds? Can we put services associated with the beds? All those sorts of conversations, really important conversations. But because we had done this series of changes year after year, really trying to dig deep into the systemic nature of what was creating those racial inequities, my coming back to vision, what happened a few months back was the Seattle City Council actually took a vote on legislation that says that kids do not belong in jail. Yeah. So it's not a goal of shifting from, 400 beds to 200 beds. It's us being clear what it is that we're trying to achieve, having that vision. And so I share that as an example, thinking about the power of the people in this room, the power of us all working within our own institutions and structures, that us doing that together is where we're going to have leverage and impact. So I feel like this is supposed to be a conversation, and I've been one of those guests at the party that takes up too much space. But the one thing I'll say about the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, it really is about organizing within government. And we are so happy to have Marin County as a part of a year-long learning cohort. There's some people, Steve Kinsey is a part of the cohort, and there's other members from the cohort here today. That the power of working within institutions to transform institutions is amazing. And having people really strategize around ending institutional racism, it's amazing the work that's being done. Having a regional approach that in Northern California, having a collection of 17 different cities, counties, and a team from the state starts to change the expectation of what is possible. What is possible from government? How can we have a public sector that is about the public good? And it changes the expectations of what's possible in our communities. So I feel like it's such a privilege and honor for me to be able to do the work that I do on a daily basis, and to be here with you all working on Marin County. That there is power in movement, and we are that movement in government with community is, to me, sort of such a life-affirming, liberating part of our lives. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
So thank you, Julie. That was a lot, and it was really good. A lot and really good. It's kind of like Thanksgiving dinner. Sleep it off a bit and go eat some more. So yeah, no, that was great.
You're not saying I put you to sleep, are you?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So you alluded to some of the work that the county is doing, and I would just say, I echo that. There's wonderful leaders within the county structure doing, some really, really cool things, and Steve is going to come talk a bit about that. But I wanted to get your take on what we as individuals can be doing to either support initiatives that the county is pushing, or maybe proposing new ideas to the county. What does that look like?
Wow, that's I think that this conversation around how racial inequities are created, that I think the big challenge for us is to think about the institutional and structural ways that inequities are perpetuated, and that I'm sure that people in this room have lots of ideas for what the county should be doing, what the school district should be doing, what the city should be doing. And I think the challenge sometimes is that we've got ideas for other people, and I think that for us collectively to have the most success, for us to be able to think and act and work within our own institutions, that it's when we are doing the work within our own institutions that authentic partnerships can actually develop. And so I think giving Steve and others in institutions ideas is good, and I think that sort of the reality that change happens by doing. And so for us all within our own organizations to be doing the work. And I don't mean just like your job, that we've got our jobs that are 8 to 5 or whatever the hours are. But thinking about the organizations that we work with more broadly, that are faith-based organizations, or the schools, that when you're a parent, what's taking place in your kids' schools. So really thinking about it, not just from yourself, from what's in your heart or in your mind, but actually what are the institutions where changes are or where inequities are being perpetuated, and to work on an institutional basis.
Great, thank you. So with that, I want to invite Steve Kinsey up to the stage. Supervisor Steve Kinsey, who represents District 4. And Steve, these panels I know probably remind you of candidates forum. This is not a candidates forum, but if you want to get back involved, I think there's some people who would support that.
That's great. Thanks,
All right.
John.
Tell us what you're doing at the county.
Well, thank you. And I would like to start by thanking First Five for putting this together, but more importantly, for putting the conversation together over a long, long period of time. First Five has really been fundamental to organizing our understanding about the substantial benefits of investing in our youth. And it's culminating this year in an initiative that I believe the entire Board of Supervisors is going to support. We call it the Strong Starts campaign, and it's probably the most significant thing that we can all do together. So Strong Starts will be a quarter-cent sales tax on this November's ballot. It has a very high bar. We have to get 2/3 of our community to commit to taxing ourselves, to reaching into our own pockets, to support several really important things. The most important being preschool. We all know, this room knows in particular, how critically important preschool education, child care wrapped around that, and the health of the children that are in our programs are to their life trajectory and to their ability to contribute and be active participants in our community overall. We will, upon our successful vote this November, become the first community in the state of California to have identified a dedicated revenue stream for our children. Now, there are programs in San Francisco, that's right. Programs in San Francisco that have been around for a long time that tap the general fund. But what is unique and different about our commitment will be that those dollars can't be touched for any other purpose. They can exclusively be used primarily for preschool education, and within that, a realization that just providing preschool isn't enough. It needs to be quality preschool. We need to have preschool workers and educators who are trained and given the support. And we need to be able to measure their success and their achievement and their progress. And the measure does provide for those elements as well. Child care is also very important, and health care is critically important. So the Strong Starts is really the pinnacle opportunity that all of us have to be a part of this year. And it's taken years and years. In fact, Amy and I were thinking about it, and it was probably almost 10 years ago. So while Julie talks about we have to have a sense of urgency, we also have to have a sense of patient determination to keep moving. And we began by looking to others who had done something like that. Dr. Lawrence came to us from Florida and said that in a community of lower middle class citizens in that state, they were able to find a dedicated funding stream to invest in their children. And that was the first spark of inspiration that's led us along this path that now is on the verge of becoming a measure. And it's a measure that we'll all face in part because all 5 county supervisors, and I see some of my colleagues, Supervisor Reisch, who serves on the first 5 commissions, Supervisor Conley, I know that Supervisor Sears, Supervisor Arnold, all of us are committed to this measure, and that's extremely helpful, and I think it's a reflection of the board's leadership. But that isn't enough either. The folks who have driven this initiative have really been the partnership of all the community organizations as well as the Office of Education. 60% of the funds that come from this measure will be allocated through the Office of Education, but they will rely on advisory bodies that exist. So that's a big, important issue for all of us to be involved in, because 2/3 is by no means guaranteed. It's going to take us actively working for that this November. The range of other things that we've been involved in, I've had, my district, the 4th District, remarkable district in Marin County. It stretches from the bay to the ocean, includes 21 distinct communities, and it has the significant number of people of color in the canal and the workforce for our working ranches and farms out in West Marin. So early on, I recognized that for me to be able to be supportive, responsive, I needed to have someone who had the cultural capacity to do that. And I want to recognize David Escobar, aide in my office. He was the most polite guy to be able to point out what white privilege means. There we go. And we began working to reflect the recognition that all cultures have a place in our county, and to work with organizations from Grassroots Leadership Network, Canal Alliance, the Welcome Center. We watched it be born and now to be prospering. All of these organizations are partners in making the change that we have. But internally at the county, and since we're talking about government today a little bit, we began back in 2010 thinking about what we could do to make change happen. We sent a delegation to Detroit in 2011 to the Policy Link conference on equity. They came back, and the interesting thing about how things change over time is that the folks that went to that conference came back, and what they wanted at that point in time, their highest priority was to watchdog the county. And John, you were a part of that. And they wanted to make sure we were spending the dollars fairly. They wanted us to create advisory bodies. They wanted us to do a lot of things to make sure that the county was fulfilling its responsibilities. We've done some of that. We still need to do more. But over the ensuing years, we've continued to meet informally as what we called an equity action team, a handful of us, many of whom are here today, thinking about how to move the dial with the county. And I'd also would like to acknowledge that leadership comes in a variety of ways. And it certainly begins with the core values of those who have the authority, who have the vested power that's been created under a government structure. And our own county administrator, Matthew Heimel, who's here with us today, I think he deserves tremendous credit for recognizing. Thank you. Matthew helped us recognize how we take these deeply held values and this sense of inequity and unfairness and injustice and can convert them into the change that's needed to begin to dismantle the systems, as we talk about, implicit or explicit, that have created the unfairness that is apparent in all the different categories of our society and are especially apparent here in Marin County because while we're a very privileged community, we are also a very white community. And so it becomes even easier for us to think we do good things as individuals and not to recognize what we as institutions are imposing on others. And so with strong leadership from Matthew and with guidance from an equity action team, we've put together the first 5-year business plan that has as its #1 program goal to create an inclusive organization, to recognize that we need to do the work internally in Marin County government and then take that leadership, that expression through action out to the larger community as well. We've done it with affinity groups where cultural identities of ethnic groups within the county workforce, African American, Latino, Indigenous, Asian Americans, each have their opportunity to have groups where they can have their own communication, their own celebrations of their culture, and then their own ideas about how they can contribute and where they want to move the dial. We did it with our business plan, committing our county government to our entire 2,000+ person workforce taking a cultural competency training over the next 2 years, and we will achieve that goal. We did it by recognizing that one of the reasons our workforce doesn't reflect our community in terms of the demographics is that so often we don't have people of color on our hiring panels, and that there is that implicit bias right there by looking across a table at someone who is the same color of skin as oneself and not recognizing how to communicate. So we have made a commitment that every one of our hiring panels will include people of color, and we will also make a concerted effort to reach beyond that, earlier than that, to make sure that folks can see the opportunities that are present working in county government. So these are important things, and obviously, having just listened to Julie for a good period of time and recognizing the embedded experience and understanding that she brings, we committed our government to participating in the Government Alliance on Racial Equity for 13 months of active education, training, and engagement, and I think that also is going to be a tremendous boost to what we can do. So all of those things are important parts of what we do. We have 5 pilot projects, as we call them, which are intended to be expressions of further action. I want to note in particular the outstanding leadership and also the great partnership that our our librarian, head librarian, and the library system, Sarah Jones, have created. Sarah and her team are working with the Novato Unified School District to ensure that we hit the targets we want for kids by the time they're in 3rd grade, around 3rd grade reading, because that is a great indicator of their ability to be successful as they go forward in their educational pursuits. And that partnership is another expression of the idea that government has a role, but it doesn't have a full responsibility. And so by working in partnership, we can go further. Our Parks Department has a goal of increasing the diversity of its workforce and is working very hard on that. Equity in health is always important, and we have a health equity plan that we're implementing as well. And through our Community Development Agency, we're taking on this sort of long history of institutional bias that's been expressed historically in the most dramatic ways around the lack of civil rights and inclusion in our housing policies. And we're going to be tackling that around affirmatively furthering fair housing opportunities. I'm just going to say one other thing that, when we talk about communities like ours and implicit bias, so often we hear the word, we want safe communities, or we want to protect our community character. These are the ways in which messaging goes out, whether intentional or otherwise, that discourages breaking down the biases that have been built into the history. I mean, it's stunning to many of us, but it's sad and true that until the middle of the 1960s, we had deed restrictions on properties. We have redlining under financing through credit unions and banks that prevented people of color from living in many of the neighborhoods in Marin County. And if you think of the cumulative impact of 150 years of those kinds of segregationist activities that are just built in the normal course of the way business is done, you get the result that we have today, where on every indicator from health and education and job prosperity, life expectancy itself, we are not where we need to be. So our commitment as a government is to move the dial. I think, and in preparing for this, I told Julie earlier, it's somewhat intimidating to talk about race, and especially as a white man. And looking around the room, I should take advantage of mentioning I also have male privilege. To really come to terms, to acknowledge that much of what we take for granted as just our own skills, capability, have been created for us by generations of advantage that have been built into systems that we don't even think about. And I personally would just suggest to all of us here, and especially those of us who are white, and even more so those of us who are male, that we should stop for a moment and think about all the ways, and if you stop for just a little bit of time and think about all the ways that we have had advantages that haven't been available to people of color, that's the first step on the road to the goal that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to really miss your leadership. The next individual that I want to call up is Ruby. And Ruby lives in District 4. She's not 18, so she can't run for public office. But why don't you sit next to your mentor, your new mentor, Mr. Kinsey, because I can see Ruby in leadership at the supervisorial level, at a ton of other levels at some point.
Absolutely.
So Ruby's on the youth commission. She's in the 8th grade, was recently accepted, and will be going to the Branson School next fall. And so Ruby, tell us a little bit about yourself, and also, some of the work that you're doing as it relates to race, ethnicity, and inequities.
So I just want to start out with thanking Marin for allowing youth to have a voice here. So often youth aren't given the ability to speak. They aren't given the opportunity to learn from what's been said before. And so that creates disparities. It makes it difficult to move forward when you don't know what you're going upon. And so, as it was formally said, I'm Ruby Clark. I'm an 8th grader at West Marin School, and next year I'm going to be going to Branson. And I, along with Bilal, were co-chairs of the Marin County Youth Commission. So what is the Marin County Youth Commission? You're probably wondering. So the Marin County Youth Commission, also known as MCYC, is a group of 20 dedicated youth, aged 12 to 23, who are dedicated with an integral voice of trying to make the community better. We have 2 representatives from each of the 5 districts. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 4. I'm one of the representatives for District 4. And then we have 10 other committee members. And those members, we try and find voices of those who are marginalized in their community. We try and find voices of LGBT youth, voices of youth of color, youth who live in rural communities and often are found in government and political systems. We try and find youth who are marginalized in a way where they feel as though they can't find a way to make change in their community. Because if youth can't make a change in their community when they're young, they won't have the chance, they won't have the voice, they won't have the idea to make change when they're older. And so, thank you. Okay, so, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so, one of the things that we do each year in order to make sure that we can understand what everyone in the commission has gone through, understand what we don't have representation from, is at the beginning of the year we have 8 hours. We have a 2-day social justice retreat. And Deborah is one of the hosts of this. And one of the things that we learn about is we learn about white privilege. We learn about systemic disenfranchisement. We learn about racism, classism, ageism. We learn about how society affects us, how we affect society, and how we all need to work together to affect society collectively and make a good and effective change. So we learn about a lot of the basis things that we need to do in order to form a coalition that can effectively enact any sort of real change. Any sort of real change that can change a community for the better. Any sort of change that isn't just superficial. A change that actually makes differences. It changes the normalizations that every single person thinks of. Because that's what society, that's what government does. Government shapes the people who live in it. And that's the goal of government, to shape and allow people to facilitate their lives in a way that's beneficial. But sometimes government doesn't do that. Sometimes government, gives implicit biases to people. Government makes it difficult for people to be who they are, for people to be respected as who they are. And so one of the things is people try and change that. People try and change government to reflect how society is today. And so the Marin County Youth Commission allows youth to do that. We speak with the Board of Supervisors on different topics. We have 3 different subcommittees: alcohol, tobacco, and other drug prevention, educational equity, and food justice. These are all very pertinent issues, not only to Marin County, but to the country and the world as a whole. Because alcohol, tobacco, and other prescription drug use in Marin is way higher than it should be. It's way higher than it is in other counties in Marin County, in California, sorry. And we have a huge educational disparity. If you look at the makeup of different public schools compared to private schools, you can see that there's a visible and visceral disruption. You can see that there's differences between A through G requirements and people who are achieving that in different schools. And then with food justice, you can also see that communities of color, people who are English language learners, they often live in a food desert, but that's also an oasis of alcohol. Like, they live in places where it's a lot easier for them to become distracted from their school. They live in places where it's frankly just not equal, it's not fair. And so I'm a 2-year member of the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Other Drugs Subcommittee of the Marin County Youth Commission, also known as ATOD. We are in our 2nd year of partnering with the CMCA, or Communities Mobilizing for a Change on Alcohol in Marin County. And we are planning on continuing that partnership next year. Throughout the past 2 years, we have been dedicated to analyzing data and collecting data. We did 103 half-an-hour conversations with individuals representing a wide sector of youth and adults to try and figure out what their goal was and how they thought alcohol affected the community, and if they thought alcohol affected the community. And so what we're trying to do now is we're analyzing the data, and we're trying to figure out a way where we can enact policy that will reduce youth drinking, and we know that that's going to be affected by race, regardless of what sort of policy implementation we decide to choose. So once again, I just want to thank you for giving me and the other youth an opportunity to let our voices be heard, and also to hear your voices.
Good. Thank you, Ruby.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's obvious I'm getting out of office just in time.
That's 8th grade, by the way. So our next speaker is another youth leader here in the county, Bilal Mubarak. He's a co-chair of the Marin County Youth Commission. He sits on the Education Committee, and he is a senior at San Marin High School. In your packet or on your program, it says that he was accepted and will attend Yale in the fall. However, he has selected to go to Princeton instead. Bilal, come on up.
I'm not going to be as eloquent as Ruby. That was impressive. So I'm Bilal. John basically covered it all. And I sit on the Educational Equity Subcommittee of the Marin County Youth Commission. I co-chair with Ruby, and it's been fun. We've done a lot this year, and last year they did a lot too. They did this great documentary called Beyond the Surface about educational equity in Marin. You all should watch it. It's on YouTube. We could use more views on that. So look it up. And after watching that documentary, a lot of numbers jumped out to us, and a lot of the interviews jumped out to us. You're significantly less likely to graduate from high school if you're Black or Latino in Marin. And Ruby mentioned the A to G requirements, and we found that 60% of people in Marin, of students in Marin, will graduate high school with the A to G requirements. And that's not bad. I mean, it could be better, but it's okay. And among English language learners, it's only 5%. That is huge. So what that means is that there's a huge inequity in education in Marin, especially surrounding these A to G requirements. So we, as the youth voice in Marin, thought it was our responsibility to take this on. And basically what we've found is that there's not exactly a lot of data surrounding, the A to G requirements and how kids know about it. So that was our first step, and we've been doing that this year. We've been doing surveys across high schools in Marin around how kids find out about A to G requirements and what they do, and how they find out about it and how much they know about it, or even if they know about them.
Could you describe what A to G requirements are? I think a lot of people don't know.
That is, I probably should have done that. So the A to G requirements are the set of class requirements for high schoolers that they need to finish before they graduate in order to be eligible for a UC or CSU system school for college. So it's extremely important if they are looking to go towards higher education in the future, and we believe that that's something that every single Marin County student should be able to achieve. And what we found is that, unfortunately, not a lot of the students, especially among these English language learners, especially among minorities, aren't given this opportunity. So we've been conducting these surveys across Marin. We're currently at Novato High School and San Marin High School, and hopefully more if more administrations answer our emails. Hopefully that'll happen. And it's going well, and we're getting our data back slowly, and that is, I think, the best way to address this issue right now. We just need to collect the data and figure out where the problem lies, and that's our first step. Right now, what I'm doing is I just recently, last week, wrote an article for my school paper because I thought it's important that people know about this, especially in my school. And I was going around and I was talking to students and I was talking to counselors, and a lot of students don't really want to talk about this because, no one wants to talk about, the state of their education. But, but there was a certain sense of denial among students that, they didn't want to go forwards with their education. And there was a certain amount of denial among our counselors. No one wants to be called a racist. And as John said, it's kind of a touchy subject. But when we look at the institutional racism in our education system in Marin, it's clearly present if we look at the numbers. And on top of that, I was trying to find a teacher of color to talk to about this issue, and that was surprisingly hard. Every single one of my teachers since freshman year has been white, other than my Spanish teacher. And she's definitely tried to make up with that, with all the homework she's given. But it was very, very, very hard, and that could easily be one of the main causes of these huge disparities that we see among students of color and non-minority students in Marin. So that's the work we've been doing, and I think it's very important, and I hope that you will watch the documentary and ask some questions.
Thank you, Bilal. Thank you. Our next youth leader is Jose Gomez, the resident of Novato High School, junior at Novato High School. He's also the president or vice president of the Friday Night Live chapter in his local area. And they're doing some really great work that he's going to share with you right now. Welcome.
Hello. Just for starters, this is my first time speaking to this big of a crowd. I'm kind of nervous. As John said, my name is Jose Gomez. I'm the vice president of Friday Night Live, FNL, Novato chapter. And our goal and priority in this year is to raise alcohol awareness throughout our community. We've done so by working through the Lee Law. The law enacted in 1994 that prevents advertisements on windows to be more than 33%. We've gone to the city council and raised the subject, And to our surprise, even all the this assistant city manager was oblivious to the law and pled ignorance to it. So that showed us that throughout our community, this problem is not even being looked at. So our group of Untitled Chapter is almost 20 strong, and we're all kids like me, young adults that that are working on this not because they want to have the extra hours in their resumes when they enter college, but because they want to, and they need, and they have something that they want to give to the community. And the reasons why they're doing this is because alcohol and drug abuse have affected their lives. Me, by instance, I come from a domestic violence family. I 4 years ago, me, my mom, my sister came to the program that helped single women that have passed through domestic violence, and I saw in the shelters, that's what they call them, many women that have been abused in many ways by their partners or husbands that have been under the influence of alcohol or drugs. So that showed me the consequences that these substances have on people. So that when I came to this school, Navarro High, I heard about this club, FNL. I was like, awesome. I just sign me up, and there are other cases like this, like mine, that are the reason why people have joined this club. So I feel like it's very necessary that we do something about this problem, and that we not only pass the word, but actually do something about it, because it's a problem, but it's not necessarily being looked at. So this is about it. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Jose, tell us a little bit more about the ordinance or policy or law that's in place that restricts the amount of signage. What are some of the particulars about that law?
The law was named after Barbara Lee.
Okay.
She was she worked for the government in Los Angeles, and she felt like the alcohol advertisement and tobacco and drug advertisement was making a really negative impact on the young society. So she raised the, if I'm correct, she put the word out and worked effortlessly on this subject until so she could bring it up to the council that she worked at.
Mm-hmm.
So policy and
what was the percentage of advertisement that could actually appear in a storefront window?
On average, it surpasses 70%.
70%.
Yeah.
And her law, it took it down to how?
And the legal law brings it down to 33%.
Okay.
But we want to bring it down to 15 to 10%.
Got it.
So, yeah.
Good work. Good work. So as you can see, we have some great leaders here in the county, and the bench is being developed. Now it's time to have a conversation, and we'll continue the conversation. We have a couple mics here in the audience, and if you make a single file line, I promise we'll speak until 10:30 comes up. So one there, and I think one over here somewhere. Okay, yeah, perfect. So any questions for anyone on the panel? Don't rush all at the same time. Miss S. Can I see your court list?
I want to know how we can help you young people. I turned 84 this week, and I'm not leaving. So I would like to know if you can articulate that, how we can help you. The rest of us are dug in, but I want you lifted way up. So can you answer that?
Well, I'm 17, and I'm not leaving either. I think the best way that adults can help is that, honestly, I think sometimes it's that they need to take a step back. Often adults do like to lead charges, and they're always the ones in front of the room. And that's great, good for them. But I think that, I don't know, children or young adults, as we prefer to be called, I think often we're the ones that know best about what is good for our future. Adults have experience, adults know a lot about the world, but as young people, we know what we're doing.
Perfect. Dave Court.
Hi, thank you. Is that on?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm Dave Court, San Geronimo Valley Community Center, and it was just an incredible panel. About in the late 90s, there was this program called Tools for Tolerance that mostly it went through MCOE, but almost every teacher in Marin and a lot of us in nonprofits got to go down, and it was all paid for, to the Wiesenthal Museum in Los Angeles. And I know for me, it was the most powerful thing I ever experienced. It was 2 days, and I went with 33 staff members of the Lagunitas School District, and everybody at our community center went too. And I know that's stayed for me. It's almost 20 years now. But I know right now there's this whole generation of teachers, nonprofit leaders, government people that didn't get to experience that. And I think it's time for an opportunity for something really powerful like that again. And so I don't know if there's, for those of you up here, some models that you've seen. Are there some opportunities in the county for us to do something that, I mean, I don't know the number, but it was hundreds and hundreds of people from Marin went to that. So I think it's time for something like that again. And I don't know if Steve has any ideas or something the foundation get behind. But I think we really need something like that.
Julie, are you aware of any convenings that might be appropriate for folks wanting to figure this subject out?
Yeah, sort of the training and increasing understanding is something that we do a lot of. And we use a train the trainer model, because what happens sometimes if you just go to something, I mean, it's good anytime you're increasing knowledge and understanding, really that's a positive thing. But when we're focused on changing organizational policy and practice, changing organizational culture, it's really important to build the skills and expertise of people within the organization. So a lot of times we will use a train the trainer model where we've got a couple of different types of curriculums that we use. And so it helps so that it's not just someone coming from the outside or you going to something special, but that you're really building the capacity of your own organization, not only to increase understanding, but to also change policy and practice. So yeah, and would be happy to share more information on that with anyone who's interested.
And maybe we can get it up on the First Five website, some of these links. Thank you.
When Michelle gets back.
Okay, all right, great. Hey, Shelley.
Hi. Again, I want to thank you so much for this event, and I hope it's the first of many. I'm the executive director of Marin Space, and we're an organization that fosters and works to support collaborative efforts around the county. And our history really comes from place-based efforts and co-location centers and real estate in the service of the public good. And what I wanted to ask you about was talking about the role, especially around policies and practices and principles with respect to the role of real estate. It could be housing inequity, it could be the real estate that government owns in terms of our school systems own a lot of property, and the role that government plays in zoning and real estate regulations, and how that plays into the places, kind of a place-based perspective on equity, and any insights that you have that you could share with us about how we can make change, because that's a real systemic institutional system that I think has a lot of impact on this issue.
Yeah. Two things I would say. Steve already talked about the history of redlining, that we need to be clear that sort of the histories, neighborhoods, communities that we have now, they were intentionally segregated through policy and practice. And so we're living with that legacy, that if we actually want to see integrated mixed income neighborhoods, then we need to do things like think about where affordable housing is located in different communities. So that's one thing. And the other thing that I would say is around from a fair housing perspective. Did I hit a raw nerve there?
We're grappling with that issue now.
Good. You should grapple with it because it's important. You know, sometimes the way sort of who lives where, it has to do with how schools are funded. It's, it's 1,000,001 different things. And so I'm really happy to hear that you're grappling with it. But the other thing I'd say is around fair housing. Talked about implicit versus explicit bias. Used to be that you'd see explicit bias. People were prevented, signs in the windows saying who could live where. Well, the truth is that we still have bias. When City of Seattle did fair housing testing based on race, the differential treatment, 69% of the time. 69% of the time, there's a difference in the way that a white person and an African-American person is treated. Then we also did it on ethnicity, and the numbers there were a little bit lower, but I mean, really not any, just marginally lower. And so what that means is that differences in prices, hundreds of dollars difference in prices based on your race. Difference in amenities, the availability of units, that all that stuff is, it's about the accessibility of housing. And so sort of thinking about the reality that we think we've got fair housing now, but when you actually test for it, we don't. And so I think the work to be done around fair housing need to think about it from an implicit bias perspective. In Seattle, after we did that testing, we actually worked with landlords to do education and policy change so we would minimize or reduce, hopefully eventually eliminate those biases that play out.
Thank you. Steve, did you want to?
I think the only thing that I would add for each of us in the room here, I brought up the issue about the conversation around community character or safe communities. We each have a responsibility when our friends and our neighbors, or even those who are writing guest columns on a regular basis in our local newspapers, try to diminish the implicit bias or even the explicit racism that lies just beneath the surface, that we speak up about that. That we take it up one-on-one with our neighbors, our friends, and people, that we have the courage to call it for what it is. And I want to just take a moment. There's a fellow who's not in the room with us today, but his name's John Young. And John Young took the Grassroots Leadership Network, and he made a point about the explicit racism in our county. And he was heavily attacked. So gird up for the conversation, but have it.
Thank you. Yes.
My name is and I'm an eligibility supervisor with Marin County Health and Human Services. And I got invited to this event by chance because I met with one of the women who work at the Marin San Francisco Food Bank. And I found it interesting, and so I wanted to come and see, and I've been really pleased with what's been presented so far. But the question I have is for Supervisor Kinsey. Is there any plans in the works to make sure that within Health and Human Services we have these kind of discussions and conversations in order to make sure we branch out and show this kind of advancement and equality to the community? Because I feel like our clients, yeah, I know. I feel like our clients may have myths and misconceptions about the way that we, do our work or the way we deal with them. And I found that, to be some of the interesting topics and conversations that are also taboo and we don't want to talk about. So I just wanted to ask.
Thank you. Thanks for asking that question. It would be easiest for me to just divert attention to the next speaker, who is the Director of Health and Human Services, and who is in fact leading a strategic planning process under a framework of equity for the entire department. So I have a great confidence that that issue will be addressed. I also think that through our mental health programs, there's a really strong leadership there. Cesar Lagleva and others who are working to create cultural competency with the community that you serve. And I think our affinity groups are intended to allow you to also bring forward the issues that you feel within your own cultural identity that need to be addressed. So perhaps Dr. Colfax will add some thoughts about that, but I think that he truly has the tools that we've given your department to address that.
Colfax.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Supervisor, and thank you for the question. I think it's really important. And I've been in HHS as the director for about a year now, and one of the key things as we think about the health and wellness of Marin County through the lens of equity, which is where we're going. All of our work will be done through an equity lens moving forward. We know that there's a 17-year life expectancy difference depending on your zip code. So in Marin County, your zip code matters a lot more about how long you live than your genetic code. And we are moving forward with a plan that's aligned with the county's 5-year business plan to really bring equity forward in a data-driven way and to have the hard conversations that I think Supervisor Kinsey is talking about. I mean, we can gloss over this. We can sort of do the, internet training and then everybody feels better because you checked something off the list. But if you actually look at communities like King County and other places where they really turn the curve, this takes a lot of hard work and it takes a lot of institutional support and it takes a lot of leadership. And it takes leadership from all levels of the organization, right? So to meet the needs of the folks that we serve, to meet the needs of the county through the equity piece, we're going to be engaging in the strategic planning process and really bringing forward the resources and the investments and also the hard conversations to change this. There's a certain amount of the institutional forces that have developed these inequities are very hard to shift without really making some changes. And if we keep doing things the same way we've been doing them, we're not going to change them. So I really welcome your leadership because we know from HHS it's going to take people across the organization to shift, and the folks in the community are going to join in that conversation, and we'll be moving forward in the next few years to really make a difference here. So thank you for the question, and you're on the spot, so I'll be looping back with you and others. And I also just want to say, as part of our equity work, one of the pilots that Steve mentioned about the pilots, and Dr. Matt Willis, who's here, is working around a childhood obesity pilot through the lens of equity. 40% of the cardiovascular disease differences that we see in the African American community compared to the rest of the communities is due to obesity. And so we're starting, working with the schools, a childhood obesity program that's starting down, early on in life, because we know that if we can shift eating habits and exercise habits early in life in communities, we won't see those equities in cardiovascular disease moving forward. So that's just a really tangible example. We can talk about these theories and these huge structural issues, but I think we really got to get real down to the program level to make a difference, and that's one of the pilots that's being supported by the board. So I do have a question, and it's actually a different. I wanted to ask the youth panel. One of the biggest ways to affect change in our culture is at the ballot box, and an initiative in San Francisco that's going on the ballot is to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in local elections. And I just wanted one or all of you to speculate and ask if that's a conversation any of your groups have been having.
Well, it's not a conversation that we've been having in our groups at this moment. It's definitely something that we should be considering. One of the former facilitator of the Marin County Youth Commission actually moved to the San Francisco Youth Commission, and on her first day, they were discussing that very issue. So I think it's something very pertinent to the youth, especially because it's something that we're going to either be wanting or be angry about having in the future. Because, like, yeah. So, Bilal, do you have anything else? Some insight?
I just think that's awesome. That would be so cool if I could vote. I know right now I'm taking a government class, and it's kind of dumb because I'm learning about government, and they're saying you should participate, and then they give us no way to participate in our local government. So I'd be on board.
Yeah.
Any thoughts, Jose, about that?
Well, matter of fact is that I'm turning 18 this June, so.
That's the best, right?
It's a moot point.
Either way, I'm all for it.
Julie.
Yeah, I'm not a youth, but I support them voting as young as possible. 16 sounds good. I wanted to say something about the obesity program, because how we talk about race really matters. And sometimes the way that we frame things, the way we talk about them, lead us to one solution versus another. And so when you think about something from obesity is a disproportionality, if we're just talking about obesity without thinking about institutional and structural drivers of it, it all gets centered on poor choices. You know, it's like, why are people not eating healthy food? Why are they not exercising? And what we really, from a leverage perspective, looking at why that is. Are there food deserts? Are there safe routes for kids to walk to school? Are there parks? That we know that those institutional and structural drivers are what create obesity inequities. And so, you know, it's always love. Sort of, I'm worked in human services for a lot of years too. And so I always love health and human services programs, but I think sometimes those of us in the field of health and human services, it's too easy to look at the program piece, and it's where within the county and within the city, thinking about the policies that are creating inequities.
Hi, this question is for Supervisor, Steve. My name is Ruthie Amon. I'm from the Novato Youth Center. I'm the Child Development Program Manager. And when you mentioned the Strong Start initiative, it brought me to a question for you. We serve children from 12 months to 14 years of age, and we are committed to quality preschool. But with quality preschool means that we need to also have lots of training for our teachers as well and education. So the question to you is there conversation about pay, better pay for our teachers?
There should be, and there has been, and you can only do so many things with a certain limited set of resources. I was privileged to be a part of the program. The county, First Five, and the Community Foundation supported the CARES program a number of years ago, which really did emphasize increasing the compensation and also the training and the skill levels of the workforce. I've advocated for this measure having some provision for that. I don't believe that it currently does. But I do believe that the recognition within the measure, within Strong Starts, is that we have to have quality to be able to be successful. And so I think it's an unfinished job that we all have to work on.
Well, one of the things that we're finding is that there is a deficit in the pool of teachers. And what's keeping us from hiring quality teachers is the fact that we are not able to compensate them for all of the work that they're doing. So this is a bigger conversation that we have to have. And if politicians are talking about raising minimum wage to living wage, and if that's going to be at $15 an hour, then we need to talk seriously about what we're going to do for our teachers.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Maricruz Aldana, and I'm also a child care teacher. And so I just wanted to see if there was any efforts on supporting the Legislative Women's Caucus to put $8 million into the child development system, because I'm hearing about Strong Start, but I'm not hearing about the support for this legislation, or if there is.
You know, we as a county have been very supportive of legislation at the state level, and I think that this is an attempt to get into the budget of the state budget. I believe it's $800 million statewide to reinforce this. This is also where one of the really important tenets of the First Five Commission is advocacy, and have been actively involved with the First Fives around the state in pushing forward these kinds of initiatives. So yes, we're on board. It does require action at both the legislative and the gubernatorial level for the budget.
So I hope that, maybe getting the word out will help also other people become aware of what's going on too, because I feel like there's a lack of information, of sharing of this information, and I feel like we would need support of a whole community to have these efforts be supported. So
thank you. Yes, we do. And we do have a child care council in our county. We also have a child care commission, and they've been reporting to our board, and they've brought these concerns to our attention. And as the last speaker mentioned, if the statewide minimum wage goes to $15 an hour, but the reimbursement rate for child care centers doesn't go up, we haven't really solved anything in that area.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kay, and I work with Marin Advocates for Children. But I'm here to kind of ask a different question. I'm a retired government employee that worked for 30 years in human resources. And Ferguson was talked about today, and I applaud the county for what they're doing in terms of trying to work with implicit bias in the hiring practices. But one of the things that I learned through my career is what are the structures and policies that public service agencies have about who they can hire and who they can't hire, and how does post standards affect the ability to hire people of color who might come against law enforcement issues more frequently in their youth before they're reaching out for a job. And I just kind of want to open that discussion up. It's not something that can be solved here, but to government officials, Marin's taking a huge step that other counties and communities in the North Bay, I just don't see it happening. So I applaud you.
Thank you. I'll just put a postscript to that. We haven't actually looked at the post standards necessarily, but we have recognized that the kind of testing that we do to bring people into employment here may have and probably does have biases built into that. And so we have changed the way in which we're doing our competency testing for employment at the county.
What's POST, Steve?
POST is police officer training. It's associated with public safety officers, and you have to get certified in order to be hired by a police and sheriff organization. So POST is a certification program of competency in law enforcement.
My name is Kerry Pearson. I'm a Mill Valley resident, and I want to thank you in particular, Steve and Johnathan, and the committees that have been working on behalf of equity. I have a question that's going to come to you, Julie, and it has to do, you reference frequently your use of data and in determining what sounds to me more like efforts at reducing or eliminating inequity. We're pretty far from equity, so we're trying to eliminate the barriers to inequity. And so I'm imagining going forward decades when we've eliminated inequity, but we still have the socioeconomic disparities that exist. And so I guess this is for you, but has Seattle or the Washington area looked at ways to address the other economic and educational disparities at the point where we begin to approach
Yeah. No, thank you. And to your point, class and race in the United States are really inextricably intertwined. that we have a huge income inequality problem in the United States. And so, conversations around increasing the minimum wage, that's one strategy, and it's really insufficient in my mind. I mean, not to say Seattle passed $15 an hour minimum wage, support it. And in Seattle, $15 an hour is not a living wage. And so I think at a really sort of foundational level, we need to have a conversation around income inequality in the United States. We know that race also holds class in place. And part of the way in which we're uncomfortable talking about race means that class inequities continue to get perpetuated. When you hold income constant, there are still racial inequities. So I think that for us to have a conversation that recognizes the complexity, people always want to pull them apart. You can't pull them apart because they're so inextricably intertwined.
Great. So check it out. We have about 10 minutes, and I want to try to do a little bit of rapid fire over the next 7 minutes, and then we'll have a 3-minute close. So if you can ask the questions as quickly as possible, and then we'll get quick responses from the panelists. Vin?
Okay, I promise I'm gonna make it short. As I come to the event like that, I hate to talk after Carrie. He's gonna bring all the points up already. Actually, I don't have no question for you, but I have a comment, and I applaud the first five take the initiative today. And anytime you talk about equity issue in Marin County, it seems like you open a can of worms. There's so many things to talk about. And I also want to applaud the leadership of the board. Last Wednesday, I attended an event for the Asian American Public Employee event. Then I met a gentleman who is the Chief Executive Director of the court system in Marin County. He happened to be a person of color. And also another person heading the new Human Resource Director. The department is also a person of color. That's first time in my life, I mean not in my life, in my 20 plus year in the Marin County, I saw that happen. So I think you do make some progress. Mm-hmm. Congratulations, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And my other suggestion is, we talk about the public sector equity issue, we also need to talk about the non-profit equity issue as well. Because in Marin County, 2,000 plus non-profit service the needy people in Marin County. How many of them are actually executive board director, a person of color, leading the non-profit? I'm not asking for promotion. I just want to. Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Magali Limeta. I'm a community member, but my question was for Supervisor Kinsey. How can we have working families be part of the political process? Sometimes meetings take place during the day and families are working 12 to 14 hours to ensure that they have food on the table. So what can we do as a community to ensure that we communicate with the Latino, African American community that they can and have a voice in the political process?
Thank you. Meetings, especially the meetings of the Board of Supervisors, really the end game. Usually, most of the decisions have been made leading up to it. And so I think that participating through your community organizations, the leadership training programs that various groups like Grassroots Leadership Network and a Welcome Center have provided that give you the skill sets to how to understand even when and where to be in government. I take your point as to the daytime versus the evening meetings, and we have tried and could try again to see if we can have more engagement through evening meetings. So it's something I'll take back to our board.
Thank you so much.
Jim.
Good morning. So I'm Jim Hogaboom. I'm the superintendent of Nevada Unified, and want to say I'm super proud of Bilal and Jose, you guys, for the training. You're so incredibly articulate. I can't believe it. So I wish you'd be in Nevada, but that's okay. I'd like to point out one more person who I met today. Marjorie Dugadia works for the First Five, and last I saw her at Hill Middle School. Congratulations. So my question is, how do we empower more students like you guys to have a voice in our system, not only in schools, but you talked a little bit about, hey, get out of the way, we know what we're doing, and which I applaud. So how do we do more of that? Because not enough students, I think, are actively involved, not only in education, but other ways to really speak out to change the way we organize things. So how do we get more of our students to be like you guys?
Who wants to take that? Go for it.
One thing that might be beneficial, I think, that everyone who wants to be a leader needs is you need a platform to start something, or else it's really difficult to get anything done. And when you're a kid and you're already working on education, trying to do something to change your community might seem like a secondary purpose because you're committed to trying to have a better future for yourself. Sometimes it's difficult to think of a better future for everyone else, and so that's put on like a back burner kind of thing. But if you give students you give them facilities to do it. You teach them how to facilitate meetings. You teach them like basics of being leaders, the basics of the issues that we're facing. You teach them to understand the issues they're facing, then they become more passionate about the issues. They can recognize them in everyday situations, see how pertinent they are to their success, and then they become more passionate. And so you need a platform for them to become leaders in order that makes it a lot easier for that to happen, so they don't have to start a grassroots initiative by themselves.
Great. Does she speak for you all?
I'll take it.
Yeah. Ma'am.
Hi, my name is Avalon. I'm a first-generation college graduate, so I work for 10,000 Degrees as a fellow. All of the fellows are first-generation college grads. They're all young adults, so I really appreciate the call-out from Bilal earlier. That was perfect. Not only are we all first-gen, but we're all from low-income communities, and for the most part, although I don't represent this, they're all also people of color. So we have our fellow program, which is like a peer-to-peer model, and then we also have a high school leadership program for students. And so my question is, as far as A through G courses, or getting students to be aware of how they can get to college and what they need to do, this is for the students, not how can we support you, because I feel like we've talked about that a lot, but where do you need to be in the community so that you can reach those students?
Let me have Bilal take that one on.
So from our data that we've collected from our surveys and our study, we found that there's a lot of different sources that people learn about the A to G requirements from. It can be your parents, it can be your counselors, it can be your, your other friends. And unfortunately, these sources are not always equally distributed throughout the community. We found that often in counseling centers, the A to G requirements, which should be very, very apparent, because they're so extremely important to a student's educational goals, they're not always openly accessible to everyone, especially in different languages. And that's probably one of the huge reasons why English language learners are not achieving these A to G requirements as much as other groups, because they just don't know about it. And on top of that, I think one of the big advances that we've had at San Marin is that these English language classes are not, they're not UC approved, so they aren't being used to fulfill these A to G requirements. And at San Marin, what we've had is that now these, they call them sheltered classes. I don't know if that's the perfect term for it, but these classes that are catered more towards English language learners are now UC approved, and they do help fulfill these A to G requirements. And I think that's a huge step forward.
That's great.
And if we could have more like that, that would be great.
So quick follow-up question. When do you think students, in your data, if you've talked about this, when do you think these students need to know? Okay, when in their...
So as early as possible. We're actually handing out our surveys to middle school students, because as early as possible is always the best. Because when you're a junior, when you're a senior, and you find out that there's all these classes that I need to take, it's way too late. And there's just no way to come back from it. So middle school, it's perfect.
Great. All right, so folks, we are unfortunately at our time. We are at our time, but let me say this. This is the start of a discussion. This is not the end. We never anticipated that we could cover all of the ground in 2 hours. But this is the start, and we have to continue this discussion, and we have to figure out a format as a county for having these discussions across the entire county. And so let's be thinking about that collectively, and let's think about resources at institutions, the county, Marin Community Foundation, school districts, and think about key folks within those organizations that could facilitate more of this discussion. It's so important that we do it. I want to give our panel. I gotta go to Suzanne. All right. And, otherwise, she's gonna take care of me after. So.
80 years old. I've been standing up. I just want to say thank you to everybody for Amy, first of all, for calling this together, and the importance of continuing these conversations in our communities. I want to thank all of the panelists. In terms of providing a platform, there's a couple of things I want to mention. Number one, we have in the San Geronimo Valley an upcoming event on May 25th called Kids, Drugs, and Alcohol 2015 Tools and Strategies. I want to invite you, Ruby, to please come and these two young men to join us. It's in the evening, it's at 6:30, and we really want to hear your voices. That's why we're having this event. I also want to say that it's impressive about how many people are here. I've worked so closely with Kristen Law, with Theo Hernandez, with Lily Thomas, because these are areas that are so intertwined. It's not just one issue, it's a complex issue. I think I'll just end with one thing. We can't have equity, we can't have accessibility unless we do something about the housing crisis in Marin County.
Amen. All right, so we'll go to one final word from each one of our panelists, and then we'll close out. Ruby.
If it's just one final word, like just one word, I'll say thanks. But if it's like remarks.
Remark.
Yeah. I just really want to thank you today for opening up to this issue, because it's a pertinent issue, it's a challenging issue, and it's an issue that we all face, we all need to understand, and we all need to accept.
Thank you.
I, too, am grateful for the substantial number of folks who made time today to be here. It is an important conversation, and it begins inside ourselves. So think about our individual relationship to the privileges that we have.
Thank you. Yeah. Jose?
I want to thank you all. You've been a really awesome crowd. And yeah, I enjoyed this. Really.
Great. Bilal?
Yeah, I'd like, at the risk of sounding cliche, I want to thank you all again, too. You guys are great. It's great to, get the word out about the stuff I've been working on and the things that affect me and my friends every day. So thank you.
Great. Julie?
Ditto. Thank you very much. Keep up the work.
All right, great. So our panelists will be around. They'll be up in this area. If you want to track them down and corner them and ask more questions, feel free to do so. But thank you all for coming out.